Imagine a time when sugar was scarce, refrigeration was a luxury, and nothing, absolutely nothing, went to waste. In the heart of the Great Depression and through the war years, one humble treat stood out in American kitchens. Home-dried apple rings. It started with a bushel of fresh-picked apples, often from a backyard tree or gathered from wild orchards. Each one was peeled by hand, cored with care, and sliced into perfect thin rings. But here's the magic. They weren't baked or boiled. They were strung up like little golden halos on twine, then hung near wood stoves, in attics, or under the eaves, where warm breezes or gentle sunlight would do the work. Day after day, the moisture vanished, and what remained was chewy, sweet, and packed with flavor, a candy from nature itself. No preservatives. No packaging. Just time, patience, and a pinch of cinnamon if you were lucky. Kids would nibble them straight from the string. Mothers tossed them into pies during winter. And soldiers carried them tucked in shirt pockets, reminders of home, bite by bite. Today they might seem rustic. But back then, they were survival. They were love. And believe it or not, some families still have jars sealed tight from the 1940s. And yes, they're technically still edible. So next time you pass the snack aisle, think about the apple rings that dried in silence, in a world without waste, and carried comfort across generations. Imagine opening a dented tin can in the middle of wartime chaos, and finding a full, hot meal inside. That's exactly what made corned beef hash one of the most beloved and enduring survival foods in American history. This Depression-era staple, made from finely chopped salted beef and starchy potatoes, was more than just a meal. It was a promise of nourishment in the toughest of times. During both world wars, soldiers and families alike relied on it. Why? Because it was cheap, filling, and virtually indestructible. Its secret weapon: longevity. These cans could last for years. Some still sit unopened in vintage pantries, their labels faded but their contents surprisingly intact. In fact, one can from 1943 was recently found in a fallout shelter, and lab tests confirmed it was still technically edible. Would you dare take a bite? Prepared in minutes, all it needed was a hot skillet and a little patience. Mothers, soldiers, even factory workers would fry it up, waiting for that golden, crispy crust to form. Sometimes, if you were lucky, a rationed egg would crown it. The smell? Unmistakable. Smoky. Meaty. Comforting. But what makes corned beef hash unforgettable is not just its taste, it's the story it tells. A story of American resilience. Of kitchens that made do with what they had. Of soldiers finding warmth in the trenches. Of children scraping plates clean because this might be the only hot meal for days. Even after the war ended, corned beef hash refused to vanish. It traveled from war kits to roadside diners. From emergency pantries to Sunday breakfasts. A simple dish, yes, but one that reminded a generation what survival tasted like. In the quiet corners of old American kitchens, tucked behind rusted utensils and faded recipe cards, lie tiny miracles that time forgot. One of them, a simple palm-sized tin from the 1940s, its label yellowed, its edges worn, marked with 3 humble words, baking powder, 1943. It may not look like much, just a bit of white powder in a tin, right? But in wartime kitchens, where sugar was rationed, eggs were powdered, and meat was a luxury, this little can was everything. It wasn't just a rising agent. It was a symbol of hope, of creativity, of families stretching meager ingredients to create something warm, something soft, something comforting. Mothers would whisper prayers as they added a spoonful of that baking powder to bowls of rationed flour. Grandmothers would fold it gently into makeshift cake mixes, hoping their children would get even just one sweet bite. It made biscuits rise. It brought fluff to pancakes. It gave life to wartime cookies when the world outside felt uncertain and flat. And here's the twist no one saw coming. Decades later, many of those tightly sealed tins were opened, and the powder still worked. Even after 60 or 70 years, it still puffed up dough just like it did during blackouts and air raids. Still turned batter into golden bread in cast-iron ovens. still filled homes with that unmistakable smell of something baking and something healing. That's more than chemistry. That's resilience in powder form. Each puff of those baked goods carries echoes of laughter, ration stamps, and candlelit dinners. Each rise is a memory, reborn. So next time you find an old tin of wartime baking powder at a flea market or in your grandmother's cupboard, don't toss it aside. You might be holding a tiny, unsung hero of the kitchen. A whisper from the past, still strong enough to rise. In the dim glow of wartime kitchens, when glass was reused and sugar was sacred, one method quietly became a symbol of resourceful love. Paraffin-waxed jam. Imagine this, a mason jar filled with jewel-tone jam, topped not with a metal lid, but with a shimmering smooth layer of clear paraffin wax. And over that, a simple cloth square tied tight with twine. No fancy packaging. No expiration date. Just the sweet hope of preserving summer's bounty, even in the coldest, darkest days. During the 1930s and 40s, families across America would gather baskets of berries, cook them down with what little sugar they had, and pour the steaming mixture into jars. Then came the magic, a layer of melted paraffin wax carefully poured on top. As it cooled, it hardened into a perfect seal, locking out air, moisture, and time itself. No refrigeration. No modern canning lids. Yet decades later, many of these jars have been found, unopened, the wax still intact, and the jam inside still vibrant, still fragrant, still spreadable. This wasn't just preservation. It was defiance against waste. It was mothers ensuring their children had a taste of strawberry in December. Grandparents sharing a slice of toast with jam as the snow fell outside, a quiet act of warmth in uncertain times. Each wax-sealed jar was a homemade time capsule. A lesson in simplicity. A reminder that sweetness could be stretched and preserved with care and creativity. So if you ever stumble upon an old jam jar with a wax cap and a faded fabric lid, don't just see it as antique clutter. See it as a love letter from the past, sweet, sealed, and still standing strong. In the tough days of wartime America, when electricity wasn't always reliable and refrigeration was a rare luxury in rural areas, preserving meat was a true test of survival know-how. And one food became an icon of that resourcefulness: homemade jerky stored in cloth sacks. Long before factory-sealed packages and plastic wrap, families used what they had: sunlight, smoke, salt, and cotton. That's it. It started with meat, often the simplest and most available cuts. Beef when you had it. Venison when the hunt was good. Even squirrel or rabbit when the pantry ran dry. The slices had to be thin, cut against the grain, so they'd dry quickly and evenly. Every piece was soaked or rubbed with salt and sometimes vinegar or spices, if the household had any left from their ration book. Then came the drying. If the weather allowed, strings were strung across porches or smokehouses, and the meat was hung carefully, where it could slowly lose moisture over days. In colder months, families used low-smoke fires inside small shacks, letting the aroma cling to the walls and the jerky absorb every bit of the heat and wisdom that came from generations before. Once it dried into the perfect texture, not brittle, not raw, just tough enough to last, the strips were wrapped in soft cloth sacks, often made from flour sacks or worn-out shirts. These cotton bundles weren't airtight, but that was the point. The jerky needed to breathe to keep mold away, and the cloth allowed it. And inside that sack wasn't just food. It was planning, preparation, protection. Families packed it into lunch pails, military rucksacks, and kitchen cabinets. You could find jerky on wagons, in storm cellars, or tucked into coat pockets during harvest. Soldiers relied on it in the field. Miners chewed on it underground. Kids would gnaw on a strip while walking home in the snow, sometimes without dinner waiting for them. This wasn't snacking. It was survival, preserved by salt and memory. And remarkably, even today, when you unwrap one of those old cloth bundles, maybe forgotten in a trunk, maybe passed down by a grandfather, you can still catch the scent of smoke, the rough texture of dried meat, the mark of hands that worked hard so others could eat. Amidst the battles of war and the echo of ration stamps, a quiet kind of sweetness grew, in backyards, on fences, in the corners of dusty gardens: figs. And what families did with those figs became a legacy of love and preservation: canned fig preserves. These weren't store-bought, factory-sweetened jams. No. These were hand-picked, sun-ripened treasures, simmered slowly with sugar and lemon in enamel pots. The kind of sweetness that didn't come from luxury, but from labor and hope. Victory gardens were more than patches of green. They were acts of patriotism, growing food at home so the troops could eat overseas. And if you were lucky enough to have a fig tree in your yard, you guarded it like gold. When the fruit blushed purple and soft under the summer sun, kids would climb barefoot to gather them, juice staining their fingers, sticky smiles spreading wide. And then, the preserving would begin. Grandmothers would slice the figs, careful not to crush their shape. The kitchen would fill with the warm aroma of simmering fruit, a blend of honeyed sweetness and citrus zest. No artificial colors. No corn syrup. Just figs, sugar, and thyme. Once ready, the preserves were ladled into sterilized mason jars, still hot, and sealed tight. But here's the magic: they weren't just stored for flavor. They were stored for feeling. A spoonful of fig preserves on cornbread during winter reminded you of summer's sun. A dollop on a soldier's breakfast biscuit, shipped from home, told him he was missed, loved, remembered. Each jar was a story. Of a tree that thrived. Of hands that worked. Of sweetness that survived. Even decades later, forgotten jars from old cellars have been discovered, perfectly sealed, the figs suspended like jewels in amber syrup. Crack one open, and you're not just tasting preserves. You're tasting preserved history. The legacy of canned fig preserves isn't just culinary, it's emotional. It's proof that even in times of great sacrifice, there was still room for something sweet. So next time you see a fig tree, remember, it once fed a nation, one jar at a time. Tucked deep inside an old wooden drawer, hidden behind tin cookie cutters and yellowing recipe cards, sits a small metal spice tin, scratched, rusted at the edges, and labeled in faded red print, "Cinnamon, ground, 1941. To most, it might seem like a relic, long past its prime. But to the wartime kitchen, it was gold. Because in the world of 1940s cooking, where ingredients were rationed and flavor was a luxury, spices were magic. And cinnamon was the king of comfort. During the lean years of World War II, when sugar was scarce, meat was rationed, and butter was measured by the tablespoon, a little spice went a long way. One sprinkle of cinnamon into wartime oatmeal, or into apples cooked down without sugar, could turn the plain into pleasure. It added warmth, aroma, and the faint memory of better days, of pies, puddings, and holidays now on hold. Spices like this were packaged in airtight tins, lined with foil or wax paper inside. Housewives guarded them carefully, using them sparingly, not because they were afraid of waste, but because they knew they wouldn't see a refill for months. And here's the astonishing part: they still work. Cinnamon, even after 50, 60, 70 years, when stored dry and sealed, doesn't truly spoil. Its oils may fade, its scent may mellow, but the spice itself? It remains usable, its flavor faint but familiar, like a whisper from the past. Crack open one of these old tins today and you might still catch the aroma. Warm, woody, slightly sweet. That same scent that drifted through kitchens during the Blitz, during blackouts, during nights when families gathered close to feel safe. It flavored rice puddings, stirred into coffee when cream ran out, mixed with dried fruit to make mock mincemeat pies. A dash in a pot of stewed apples could lift an entire day's mood. Cinnamon didn't just season food, it seasoned memory. So the next time you stumble across one of these vintage spice tins at a flea market or in your grandmother's pantry, don't toss it. Open it gently. Take a whiff. You may find that what's inside still carries the spirit of survival, warmth, and quiet celebration, sealed tight in a 1940s kitchen, waiting to be remembered. In the heart of America's southern farmlands, before refined sugar dominated the pantry, there was something sweeter, deeper, richer. It flowed thick like honey, with a taste of molasses and a whisper of earth. It was sorghum syrup, the South's very own liquid gold. Back in the days of the Depression and World War II, when imported sugar was scarce and expensive, sorghum became more than a treat, it was a savior. Farmers, especially in Kentucky, Tennessee, and Georgia, would harvest tall green sorghum cane fields by hand. The stalks were crushed in iron mills powered by mules, squeezing out every drop of juice. That juice was then boiled in open kettles over wood fires for hours, until it transformed into a glossy, deep amber syrup. It was poured warm into heavy stoneware jugs or mason jars, sometimes sealed with wax, and tucked away in cool pantries or root cellars. This thick syrup could last months, even years, without spoiling. But sorghum wasn't just a sugar replacement. It was flavor. It was poured over cornbread, stirred into coffee, mixed into cakes and cookies, even drizzled over bacon. It was the heart of the Southern breakfast table and the soul of many wartime recipes. And unlike refined sugar, sorghum syrup was rich in iron, calcium, and potassium. In those lean times, it wasn't just sweet, it was strength. What's even more astonishing? Some of those original stoneware jugs of sorghum still exist, tucked away in barns, basements, and antique stores, and many are still good. No refrigeration, no preservatives, just tradition and care. So the next time you spot one of those old jugs with a cork or wax-sealed lid, know that you're looking at more than just syrup. You're holding a piece of Southern resilience, a jar of hard work, family breakfasts, and sweetness born from struggle. Because in the South, sorghum wasn't just food, it was heritage in a jug. They were small, soft, and packed in brine, and yet, during wartime and hard times, they packed a punch far beyond their size. We're talking about the humble Vienna sausages, those curious little canned meats that quietly earned a reputation as emergency protein in both the trenches and kitchens of America. These compact tins first became popular in the early 1900s but rose to legendary status during the Great Depression and World War II. With meat scarce and fresh food unpredictable, canned goods offered families one crucial thing: certainty. Vienna sausages, made from finely ground pork, beef, or chicken, were vacuum-sealed in cans and shelf-stable for years. You didn't need refrigeration. You didn't need spices. You didn't even need to cook them. Just peel back the lid, and there they were, pale, plump, and slippery, but ready to eat. To some, they were a lifeline. To others, a childhood memory served with crackers and mustard on a cold night. Soldiers carried them in their field packs. Families stored stacks of them in pantries for blackouts and rations. Children ate them in lunchboxes. These sausages became more than just food. They were symbols of survival, creativity, and adaptation. And let's not forget how people dressed them up. Fried in a pan, diced into stews, or served with pickles and onions, Vienna sausages may have come from a can, but they found their way into hearts and households with surprising ease. Even today, many preppers and survivalists still keep Vienna sausages in emergency kits. Why? Because they last, they nourish, and they remind us of a time when people made the most of very little and never let pride get in the way of getting by. Tiny cans. Big impact. Before there were freezers, pantries hummed with quiet heroes. None were humbler or more powerful than the dried navy bean. These tiny, oval beans, cream-colored and seemingly unremarkable, have kept bellies full and hearts hopeful through some of the darkest chapters of American history. Their name isn't just poetic. Navy beans earned their title from being a staple in U.S. Navy rations as far back as the 1800s. Why? Because they were compact, calorie-rich, and, most of all, long-lasting. Stored in burlap sacks, they could survive 30 years or more if kept dry and dark. During the Great Depression and World War II, they were more than food, they were a strategy. Families would soak them overnight, boiling them into stews, stretching meat rations, or baking them slow with molasses for Sunday supper. One sack of beans could mean weeks of nourishment. They were democratic too, just as likely to show up in a New England chowder as in a Southern pot of ham and beans. They crossed borders, fed soldiers, sailors, factory workers, and children. And they never needed a refrigerator. Even more astonishing, Archaeologists have found dried beans stored decades ago, even a century, that were still viable. So imagine opening a forgotten burlap sack from 1940, cooking up a pot, and tasting something unchanged by time, resilience, served hot with a spoon. In today's world of fast food and fragile supply chains, dried navy beans remind us that survival isn't always loud or flashy. Sometimes, it's a simple legume that refuses to quit, even after generations.